Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Did poltergeists really attack a tiny house in Bridgeport, Connecticut in November 1974? How reliable are eyewitnesses? What is a poltergeist anyway?
Hey there, and welcome to the 509th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I am Ben, and those varied questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. And this evening we bring you an especially interesting show with an author who's writing a book about a case to which my dad is one of the few surviving witnesses. And contrary to popular belief, we do welcome phone calls, and the number is, locally, 401-766-1240, and from anywhere in the U.S. or Canada, it is 800-449-1240. So let us get going.
Bill Hall was born and raised in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and saw reports about what I call the Bridgeport poltergeist outbreak on television when he was 10 years old. Also known as the Lindley Street haunting, it became the talk of the city and much of the world for years to come. Bill is a magician experienced in researching the unexplained, from folklore and urban legend to fortune-telling, the pyramids, and much more. His syndicated 1990s column Magic and the Unknown ran for 6 years in multiple local papers in his home state. He is a member of the Society of American Magicians Psychic Investigation Committee, and Bill's bio says Bill has vast experience in how one could haunt their house, as well as experience in how a false psychic could wow even the most sophisticated of spectators. The true haunting of 966 Lindley Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut was one paranormal incident that stuck in his mind. After peeling back the layers and obtaining more evidence than ever before, there finally is adequate information to find out what really happened at Lindley Street, unquote. Bill's website, www.966lindleystreet, that's ST.com.
So Bill Hall, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. So, Bill, I've heard about this case from my dad all my life, throughout all the talks, whatever. It's the one that most stuck out to me. So can you give us a quick overview for people who don't know?
Well, it involves a tiny home in downtown Bridgeport, Connecticut, near the hospital, 738 square feet. So tiny little home with a couple that you never would have heard of if it wasn't for this. It was Jerry Gooden, who was a maintenance worker, and his wife, Laura, and they had a little girl, Marcia, who was 10 years old at the time. To give you a real quick rundown on it, they started experiencing banging sounds on the inside and outsides of the walls back in late October, early November 1971. Was the very first occurrence of it, and they complained about it to the police. There were numerous things going on 71 and 72 at the same time when these bangings occurred, both in that same period of time around November. And they thought it might be there was some construction going on at the hospital. In addition, there was a new route being put up on the highway, so there was explosions going on. There was developers trying to put a condominium in next door, so they thought it may be them because they were trying to stop that. All sorts of things. And they had all sorts of people in there, and they just couldn't figure out what this was all from. And then in November of 74, and there's some, as your dad knows,
yeah.
Paul, as you know, there's some other things that happen in there, but to
just a few, yeah.
Yeah, to give you a quick overview, November of 74 is when it really broke out, when the public became aware of it, and at the height of the activity. And there was noises, audio phenomena, there was things floating, things flying across the room, misty figures, and a lot of attacks against religious articles, which some would think, like Ed and Lorraine Warren at the time, were signs of it being demonic, and others would think it's really, it really isn't as much of a concentration. There were about 93 logged incidents in all. There probably were more than actually took place, but witnesses gathered up about 93 incidents. And what was very interesting about this case is it was like old school social media. I mean, it really rippled around the world, and as far as Australia, Israel, and there was a crowd of thousands of people outside. Numbers vary depending on which paper you read and who you ask, but it's pretty certain that there were over 2,000. And the witnesses involved probably about 60-70% of the police department, as well as about 12 firemen, 2 fire chiefs, lieutenants, captains of the police department, as well as witnesses, neighbors, extended family, reporters, and Paulino.
There we go.
And so then after a few days, they brought an inspector in and claimed it was a hoax caused by Marcia. And that's a very basic overview. And then we can take it in whatever direction we'd like to from there, depending on what you think's best.
Well, we're still just sticking with some what's a good word? Some surface questions before we hit the button to dive deeper into this ocean here. How did you track down all this information?
Well, it's very funny. It started with a Facebook post in one of these groups of, did you grow up in Bridgeport, or I grew up in Bridgeport in the 70s and 80s, and so I got a post that said, does anybody remember the haunting on Lindley Street? And it occurred to me that was a case throughout my Magic and the Unknown days and research and writing days that I never really looked into. And so I started reading online a few newspapers about it. And soon I was really taken by it, because it sounded too complex to be explained as simply as of saying that Marcy did it. But from newspapers you couldn't really reach a conclusion. Obviously, it left more questions than answers. So I went through the newspapers and literally wrote out every name and title that I saw, and started dialing for data, and ended up finding Boyce Beatty, who was the main investigator, one of the main investigators in a real in-depth investigation that took place right after the hoax story and everything died down. Actually started December 18th, so it's that kind of time frame, 2 weeks going to, the first of the year, and they stayed at the home and went to the police department, etc. So I found Boyce, found that he was still in the same town, and called him up, and I said, I'd like to interview you. I didn't really know where I was going with it yet, but I figured let me get some interviews and see where we can go from there. And I started interviewing Boyce, and he mentioned he's talking about these models of the home and all these witnesses and these interviews, and all of a sudden, I have to interrupt him, and I'm like, well, Boyce, where are all these tapes and interviews and data? And well, they're in a box in my basement. And that's how it started. I said, could I see him? He's like, sure. And of course, he was thrilled someone was interested in that case. And he wonderful man. He invited me over his house and gave me a slideshow presentation and let me read some of his reports while he read the newspaper, and then afterwards we were ready to talk, and that's how it started.
Interesting. So were there any scientific, I say that in quotes, scientific investigations?
It was by Boyce, who was on the psychic and paranormal investigating side, and two gentlemen from Duke University.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jerry Sulfin and Blue Harari or Keith Harari.
Keith Harari, yeah, I knew them.
Yeah, good people. I did speak to Jerry. I had a follow-up interview with Jerry, which was really amazing. And the Bill Roll, by the way, interesting note, Bill Roll was actually going to be an investigator for the Lindley Street case, but he was away in England at the time.
I remember that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So he sent Jerry and Blue in his place. But there was no outside of those three. No. What was scientific about it, not only the way they went about the investigation, but they did administer some psychological tests on the family members, a variety of them, some that are still used today, some we no longer use as those things. But Boyce, he has a number of certifications. I couldn't tell you exactly. I know hypnotherapy and some other things. He's quite a smart guy.
Oh, yeah.
Princeton grad, so.
Well,
okay.
It's over,
I remember.
You now.
Okay, I remember Jerry Sulfin wrote to me and said that they never even wrote an in-house report on the case. They just couldn't reach any conclusions.
Yeah, that was quite shocking to Boyce. Boyce said that he was really shocked and a little saddened by that.
So was I.
I didn't know Jerry saw it. I didn't know Jerry said it, in other words. But I read that in the paper.
Yeah.
And I said, Boyce, they said that you guys, had conflicting reports and didn't even do. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, it was presented. The report was presented, and here's my findings. And, he gave me this multi-page report, which I'm going to reproduce and put in the book, as a matter of fact. And he's like, that's not true at all.
Well,
and
I'd like to see that because I have a copy of his letter. I still have the original letter, as a matter of fact. But maybe they decided later on to do something with it.
Yeah, and in talking to Jerry, too, there was no question in his mind that it was, that it was real. Especially since the police department mandated that their police officers be interviewed. I mean, Jerry Sulfin was, very instrumental in that. So, I'm surprised at that. And Boyce was also. But, they definitely reached a conclusion. But I do think what was misinterpreted by the newspapers is Boyce was writing from a scientific perspective of a paranormal investigator, and he said in there that there were some incidents that were faked by Marcy. And in saying that, I think the newspaper saw it and said, so they can't make a conclusion. Some are real and some are fake. Because Boyce was writing it as if you understand the dynamics of poltergeists and children, etc. in these cases. He was writing it really from a much more knowledgeable viewpoint. And that letter that he gave the newspaper, they didn't interpret it that way. And, why would they? They didn't really, I don't think they understood it. So when it came out in the newspaper, they said that, they couldn't reach a conclusion.
Yeah. Well, I remember on one occasion, because my job was to watch Marcy for those 3 days and make sure she wasn't doing anything. And at one point, she pushed a chair in the living room. I suppose a little kid did, gee, maybe it'll keep moving, But everybody in the room jumped on her and said, Marcy, don't do that.
And it's a great point you bring up, Paul, because when people say, Marcy had the family, everybody fooled, through all these interviews, whenever there was an incident brought up that was known that Marcy did, it didn't fool anybody.
Exactly.
She was dancing around, threw coats on her head. Yeah, we knew that was her.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Well, the idea that, and I wrote this in my own book, that the idea that in this tiny house you could have a little kid throwing around huge pieces of furniture, doing stuff in front of trained police officers, firefighters, and investigators, clergy, the press. And it's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard in a life of hearing many ridiculous things.
Right. Yeah, It's all in the delivery. I mean, when you read it in the newspaper, as a person reading the paper, once you hear the hoax announcement, you would go on your business and say, okay, well, they said the refrigerator floated. It probably didn't actually float.
Sure it did. I saw it myself.
Right, but I'm saying to an observer, to somebody...
Oh, I see, sure.
Yeah, I mean, the devil's in the details, excuse the pun.
Especially in this case.
And that's what interested me, because as a magician, I'm reading this and say, okay, well, you said it did this. That's your perception of what happened. What actually happened? It may be more fantastic what happened, or it could be normal. Without knowing the details, it's really hard to tell. But in hearing these interviews, I mean, these guys were amazing. They didn't see a refrigerator float and run away. The police instead ran to the refrigerator and tilted it, and one ran downstairs to check the ceiling. I mean, they weren't idiots. They actually did an amazing job. Everybody, I think, in that case, did a great job.
Well, I remember Officer, I believe it was Lawson, saw this thing, a refrigerator thing, and he backed out of the house, backed down the sidewalk, and sat in the cruiser.
Yes.
It wouldn't come out. In 1998, when I wrote the book in which I recount the case from my perspective, I was at a book signing in Warwick, Rhode Island, and a woman came up to me and said that her father had been a firefighter in Bridgeport at the time, had been to this house, and that they couldn't find him for 3 days. I believe I told you this in our private interview.
Oh.
And he was apparently in the apartment above their garage and was too frightened to come out. So this did have a profound effect, and they certainly would not have forgotten it.
Yeah, it was... one police officer said it was either the B or the B, the bar or the blessing.
Right.
When you left that house, you either went to the bar or you went to get blessed.
That's right.
One or the other. But I would. Most people didn't react the way you would imagine in like a horror movie. And of course, Paul, with your experience and Ben too. Now, you guys probably know that it's much different and a much more of a varied response to the unknown than what we see on TV and in the movies.
Oh, sure, yeah.
People go to try to understand. They don't run away. Occasionally they do. Like in the case where where Leroy almost got hit by a picture too, and finally, like you said, he gets up and he says, "That's it, I'm out of here."
Yeah,
he backs himself out and locks himself in the patrol car.
Yeah.
I
mean, not to laugh at the poor man. I mean, these things can be pretty shocking to your paradigm.
I'm surprised. Well, there were some policemen that wouldn't even go in the house. That said, you can have my job, or you can have my job before I get in there.
So, Bill, I wanted to ask you, when we talked to you, one of the prime eyewitnesses was Marcia Gooden, who was 10 years old at the time. She'd be 49 now. Have you had any luck in finding her? Or do you want to talk about that?
No, we could. It's the reason I hesitate is it's a yes and no. I think I brought it as far as I could. We do know she's not in the United States.
Oh, she's not. No.
Her family, I was lucky enough to come across some of her family that was willing to talk, that said that they do know many years ago that she went back to Canada.
Oh, yeah, she was from Canada originally, yeah.
Right. So, that's what everybody thought, and that seemed to, but, where she is now, that we don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that, and then...
Oh.
Yeah, then you beat me to it.
Well, is everybody, this case has whiskers. I mean, it's a long time ago. Ed Warren's passed away. Father Bill Charbonneau, the priest who was working with us, has passed away. Certainly, Marcy can't be located. Both the Gooden parents are no longer with us, so there's really just, in that particular group, Lorraine Warren and myself.
Right. It's amazing. There's a lot of people that have come forth, for, Captain Fabrizi, one of the gentlemen.
Oh, yeah.
One of the police officers that said, it's a hoax. I interviewed his nephew. So, and and you get to hear behind the scenes, what they're saying about this. A son of a doctor who was very close friends growing up with Superintendent Walsh, I interviewed. So, if you can't get them, the children or family members sometimes will tell you bits and pieces of what they know, and it makes for a very interesting story. But just to answer the question, the nephew of Fabrizi said they used to ask him all the time at family get-togethers.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle, come on, what happened on Lindley Street?
Yeah, right. Well, Bill, another thing I wanted to ask you was, as a trained, you make me think of Houdini in a way, who went around exposing psychics and mediums and things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, as a trained observer of hoaxes, what convinced you that this case was real?
It was quite a journey from being a suspect to real. I wasn't going to be convinced until I heard from every witness and until I heard from the police officers that exposed, Marcy.
Mm-hmm.
What really convinced me was the amount of witnesses in conjunction with the nature of the phenomena, and then wrapped around it, I guess, and I don't mean this to be a cop-out answer, but it really had to be the totality of the evidence.
Sure.
Because I can make a picture fall off the wall. And I might be able to make the cross pull itself out from the wall, but that would be difficult. And it gets to a point, there's that tipping point where you say to yourself, why would I try to make a refrigerator float? I don't need to. If I wanted to haunt a house, why would I make that thing float?
Sure.
Because it's either got to be a fake refrigerator or I need hydraulics. Mm-hmm. And it's a small house, and I already made other things happen. Why am I doing this? So, logically, there comes a point when it's so much harder to explain it as a hoax than it is to explain it that it's real. But it takes quite a lot of that evidence for
mm-hmm.
me. I mean, I'm open-minded, but it's really tough to convince me. I mean, the things that I've seen possible with trickery it just blows your mind, and you've probably seen some of them too.
Sure. Well, if I can just read, you also interviewed Patrolman Joseph Tomek, whom I was in touch with after my 1998 book, Faces at the Window, came out that recounts this case, at least from my point of view.
Yep.
If I can just quote a little bit of what he said in his report, which is dated 24 November 1974, Suspicious Activity. While conducting the initial investigation, Patrolman Joseph Tomek, Carl Leonzi, George Wilson, and Leroy Lawson observed one or more of the following happen. The refrigerator rise approximately 6 inches off the floor, a 21-inch portable television set in the living room rise off a table and turn around, furniture move away from wall and fall over. Objects on shelves and hanging from the wall start vibrating. Also observed the lounge chair that Marcia was sitting in move rapidly backwards and overturn. When officers at the scene tried to move the chair, they did so with great difficulty. And it's a much longer report, but I'm sure you've seen all that. Actually, why don't we take a break at this point, and we can come back and talk about perhaps Patrolman Tomek's interview with you and some others as well. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Russ Gorman. When I first started doing my show, a program director with a mischievous sense of humor started a rumor that I did the show in the nude. Not true. But you'll get the naked truth and an astrological chart that I do for you. I uncover every aspect of your life, helping you to strip away your problems and give you insight to your future. If you're seeking the real skinny for this exciting year, call me for information on getting your individual chart or update done at 401-333-4048 and get your free lucky numbers for the entire year. Don't come home from a casino in a barrel. From the top to the bottom of every page will bear the facts about you and your future. Call me at 401-333-4048 for a real eye-opener. I'm also available for speaking engagements for your club or groups and for private parties.
Well, we just wanted to tell you about two charities that, of the several Ben and I have adopted. You can find on BehindTheParanormal.com, our show website, all of them. But particularly USACares.org. USA Cares provides financial and all sorts of assistance in that realm to veterans and their families, particularly families of veterans who have been lost in combat in the past since 2011. I should say since September 11, 2001, in the War on Terror. And we encourage you to check that out and to make a contribution to them because they do a lot of good things. It's USACares.org. Also, Canadian Veterans Advocacy. Our friend Mike Blaze up in Ontario has founded that. Does a lot of legal advocacy for Canadian veterans as well, who, as you know, have been by our side in Afghanistan since the beginning and are doing a lot of great work there as well. So check those out, Canadian Veterans Advocacy.org and USACares.org. And I want to give you our phone numbers again. People always say, well, I would have called in if you'd given the phone number. But anyway, it's 401-766-1240 locally. And from anywhere in the U.S. or Canada, 800-449-1240. Let's get back to our interview with Bill Hall, who is writing a book on the Bridgeport, Connecticut Poltergeist case, the Lindley Street case of 1974 in Bridgeport. So we just quoted before the break, Bill, a police report from Patrolman Joseph Tomek, whom I met, of course, on site. And when you talked to him, how were you received? What was his reaction? Does he still remember?
Oh, yes, he remembers.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, it actually was quite funny. The first thing he says is, how'd you get my number? You know, who are you? What? You know, he went into police officer mode. He's been wonderful. At first, he was apprehensive about talking about it. He wanted to check with his fellow officers. And so he mentioned, a few names, and I said, well, this one is, deceased, and I'm sorry, this one's deceased too. And he said, well, I better tell you the whole story then, because, I don't want this to go to the grave. And he revealed all the things he didn't put in the police report. Interestingly enough, though, he had mentioned, I think the second time I talked to him a few times, and what's nice about these interviews is it really is a give and take, because everybody has seen a piece. They're a witness to a piece of it, and they have a lot of questions about the other pieces.
Yeah, as did I. There were many things you mentioned that I hadn't heard of before. Yeah, and unfortunately, because you've been so good to me, I'm going to have to give you a book, and so that's one less sale. But so Joe didn't know who these people were. He goes, I don't know who these people were, but they had a lot of funding. There's a lot of paper, and I was forced to interview. I didn't have a choice to interview. All of us were marched in there. We had to be interviewed. We had no choice, and that was neat, because then later when I talked to Jerry Sulfan, he told me from the other side, and then I was able to tell Joe, how it connected. So I'm hoping that, and some people have said, thank you. This has kind of cleansed the air for me. So that's a good feeling, and they all add a little something to it. But getting back to Joe about the second phone call, he said, I still have the original police report, he said. And I said, wow, could I have a copy of it? And he's like, oh, I don't know, maybe I'll send a copy to you. So weeks go by. I figured, I'm never going to get a copy of this report. And one day I get the mail, and there it is. And of course, I'm feeling like I'm 10 years old again, because there it is. I see Joe Tomek, and there's a letter, and I know what it is. And he sent me the original long form 3-page police report, which consists of the whole story. And he was very smart the way he did the report, because he said they saw one or more of the following. I had asked him, well, why weren't you more specific as to who saw what? Because it read a little, ambiguous. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, I needed to do that in case we had to be a witness in the future. I wanted to make sure that somebody didn't bring this police report out and use it against us and say, oh, well, Joe Tomek said he saw a refrigerator float, so, can't go by what he says. So he didn't specify who saw what in order to protect the officers.
So that was very interesting, the psychology behind, why it was done in that way.
Yeah, true. Who else have you interviewed lately besides me?
The daughter of the Holsworth family.
Oh yeah, they were across the street, as I recall. Yeah.
Yes, and she was actually there at the time. And this is interesting because when I was listening to the interviews, they briefly mentioned her name. I don't want to give her name because I don't have a release from her yet, although she says she's fine with it. But out of respect, I don't want to. But and they mentioned her very quickly, like she was in the background, and they're like, "Well, you saw it too, didn't you? It was the TV floating down." And she says, "Yes." And so I'm listening to this interview about the third time. It's like all I did with my time, and I hear her back there, and I'm like, "Oh my God, she's in high school then. I can call her." So I called her and interviewed her. A very interesting interview was with the Goodins lawyer at the time. There were all these rumors that the Warrens were billed for phone calls, and the Warrens.
That's true, actually, from what I was told by Ed.
Yeah, that's interesting because this guy doesn't remember it. He said that they also said that they billed the Warrens for broken furniture and stuff, which was, the attorney said that's not true at all. The attorney said that and he was very young at the time, and he said he was very, money hungry. He was aggressive. He was a young attorney, and he had a lot of different ways that the Goodins could make a lot of money off of this. Mm-hmm. And he was very disappointed because they wanted no part of it. And he said, then against my guidance, they go on WNAB and do a free interview. So that was interesting to me, and of course, led credence to the whole thing because I interviewed him, earlier. But
then it wouldn't have turned into the Amityville Horror or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the reasons that as far as the Duke University Parapsychology Laboratory at the time, which would involve Jerry Salfin and Keith Harari, then there was a certain taint to the Warrens. They were not considered scientific, and they were considered somewhat because of showman-like, things of this kind. Yeah. And that's not entirely unjustified, but that would have transferred to me at the time. So maybe that's why Jerry wasn't forthcoming with all the information. But be that as it may, I just think it's really amazing that you've managed to bring all this together. Can you tell me? Why don't we talk about? Have you talked to anybody from the press who was there?
Yes, John Sopko.
John Sopko, I remember him. Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to him. I talked to the electrical inspector.
Okay.
And so that was interesting because there's just one of those people that was inside the house and that you wouldn't know of. And I've tried to make contact with Tim Quinn and Bob Pantano. Haven't heard back from them yet. I'm hoping that they do return. And there's a few people from CBS, and I'm still I have calls out to. But John Sopko's the big one.
Yeah.
Have you been to the house lately? Is it even still there?
Oh yeah, the house is there. My dad's in Bridgeport, so I'm down there every week.
Oh, well.
Not necessarily at the house, but, but the house is it's got an old rusty chain around the fence, and it looks like no one is living in it. It had the same owner since 1998, and so I don't know if the lady's very old and locks it for security, or if it's rented out now and she's in a nursing home or moved out and bought a house. Actually, her herself I don't think is very old, but I heard that maybe it was rented to an old couple or something. But it doesn't look like it's inhabited now. I did make phone calls and send letters and haven't had a response. I really want to have the book launch there.
Wow, that'd be great.
Yeah, great publicity.
There's no room.
Right, yeah, there's no room, so what I figured is if it's a warm enough night, see, we could recreate the crowd scene. So, you know.
You need a lot of people. Well, I remember John Sopko of the Bridgeport Post was in the house on Monday night when all this went down with the some of the strangest stuff I saw when I had my sort of physical encounter with one of these entities. Because I went in there. This was the first major poltergeist case that I had seen. And I went in there with the idea that this was what people said it was, that there was an agent, you know, the child in this case, that the energy was building up and these things were being caused by that. But I felt entities. I felt personalities. I felt alien beings, not in the space sense, but in the sense of not human. And I don't know, Ed and Lorraine Warren took me seriously to a point. And, you know, my opinions were welcome, but, you know, thank you for your opinion, you know. To them, they were demons. And my theological training said the same thing, but there was just something that wasn't right. And we talked about this in our private interview. And I've talked about it on the show many times. But John was there, and he saw this whole thing. And he was one of the people, I pulled him out of the house because the Warrens weren't there at the time. It was just myself and John and the family and a neighbor who was also their babysitter from time to time. So I pulled them all out of the house because the energy was just getting so strong. And one of the weirdest incidents of the whole case was Gooden, Jerry Gooden, in the kitchen. When I said there was something, you could see almost a gauzy, you know, cloud in the kitchen. And he starts singing in Latin in a beautiful bass voice. It sounded like something to me from the funeral mass. Now, this guy, as you say, was a maintenance worker. He'd been an altar boy, but no altar boy picks up that kind of Latin. He just sort of memorized at the time in the old mass, as they called, which itself had not been around for over 10 years at that point. So that was one of the strangest things. And I've seen this happen before. People sort of change personalities spontaneously and will say things in languages they don't know, and it's not necessarily any kind of possession or anything of that sort, but it's just one of the strangest phenomena, and I have explanations for it, I think, or possible explanations. I don't want to get into them here, but that was one of the weirdest instances of the case. Did John mention that at all?
Yes, he did. There were a lot of witnesses to the gauzy figures that appeared a few times.
Yeah.
And one, of course, you probably know is Father Charbonneau and Ed and Lorraine Warren in the basement.
Yeah.
And, Ed said he saw horns on it, and Father Charbonneau said no. So, that may have been from Ed's point of view with demons.
Yeah.
But the Gregorian chant that he did was, he was reciting the Mass in Latin, including the responses, and he said himself that, in the interviews that, he said, well, I knew some Latin. He said, I don't know how I remembered it all. He wasn't saying it was supernatural. Matter of fact, although he wavered at times, the family said over and over, they don't believe in the supernatural at all.
Yeah.
But of course, lack of explanation, they started saying, maybe it's the boy we had before that died, maybe it's, a spirit, maybe it's whatever it is. And
the usual suspects, yeah.
Right, yeah, what are you going to do? You lack explanations. He often said it was underground springs, without knowing, but I mean, they went through a lot of trouble to get rid of these noises, too. I mean, they went from gas to electric. They had all sorts of inspectors come in the house. I mean, it was the things that they did. And, when you asked about what convinced you it's real, their actions were the kind of actions that, as a magician, you think of what would be the actions that you would take to really sell what you're doing, and their actions were so in-depth and detailed to the point that if you were doing a hoax, and we know it's not one, but if we were doing one, you wouldn't go to this level of detail. I'll give you one example. When this stuff was happening, Marcy goes to go to the bathroom. Jerry runs over there and says, "Leave the door open a little in case something happens." that's the kind of thing you don't think of if you're trying to pull something over on somebody.
Yeah.
That's something that you think of when you're really reacting to something, happening.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true. I remember that bathroom too, because there were things constantly falling into the tub, over the 3-day period, and it was strange. I was amazed by the number of television sets in this house. I think every room had one, small as it was, and the number of bottles of whatever makeup or whatever you have Mrs. Gooden had that was constantly falling into the tub. It was really one of the things that stands out for me.
Yeah, there was a lot happening. The metal rod coming off from the shower that was really
right. I remember
really
that too.
Locked in there. That came out and hit Marcy in the head.
When I got there on Sunday, Mrs. Gooden arrived shortly thereafter with from St. Vincent's Hospital with her toe dressed because of the injury. The television, I believe it was a television, had fallen and broken her toe. And then, sure enough, the following night, I was there with the girl in the kitchen, with Marcy in the kitchen, and the police officer at the table. I can't remember his name. I think he was a sergeant. And Ed and Lorraine Warren and the two Goodens. And that television set went over and hit me in the leg and knocked the girl and I both across the kitchen. And it was a floor model television set. It didn't fall off any shelf. And I had noticed that the flowers were starting to move. There were plastic flowers on top. And Mr. Gooden, Jerry, who apparently was an old hand at this now, was saying that, the television's going to go over. And Ben has a question.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a really quick question. I guess this is sort of for both of you. I don't know why I never thought of asking this before. Has there ever been any, slight inconsistencies with people's reports, or, whether it's large or little tiny, minute details? But, I mean, it seems like everything's pretty consistent, but you never know that there might be, some sort of strange little, flukes or whatever that happened.
Well, Bill, you can take that one out, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I diagrammed it out looking for the same thing as I listened to the interviews. There were two major ones. Well, actually three. One was inconsistencies in the police officer who reported it a hoax, saying later some things happened that when he was interviewed he said he didn't know. But later on said, oh no, for sure, I caught her doing this, I caught this, I caught that. But in the interview said, I honestly don't know. So that was one inconsistency. The other two are with the Gooden. One was about the cat.
Oh, the cat.
Yeah, Jerry swore the cat could talk, and later on he said it couldn't talk. And really, what I've concluded, and I don't discount that to mean he's lying about everything, but I think he felt really bad that he was taken at times by Marcy with the cat.
Well, all right, the cat. That was going to be my next question. Do you have anything else, Ben? Before
that was my big thing. And
we come from a cat-fancying family, so I have nothing against cats. But this cat was supposedly able to talk, and Marcy, I could see very clearly that she would hold the cat next to her. And she told me the cat was her only friend. And she had been in that house, kept home from school because she had been picked on, bullied, as we'd call it today, at school. And she was the isolation is what made me suspicious too, because that things like this can tend to build up in that scenario. So the cat, she'd hold the cat close to her throat, and she was making I wouldn't call her a ventriloquist, but she was on the way. But I could clearly see it was her making the noises. But Gooden told me, he swore that cat would be in the cellar, come up to the top of the stairs. He said the cat would pound on the door, yell, sometimes in French, and then yell at him, "Let me out, you dirty rat."
Yeah.
That quote's a quote from.
Was he a 1930s gangster?
That's what I jocularly told Jerry that maybe he was had possessed by the ghost of Jimmy Cagney, but he didn't find that very amusing.
I would.
Well, there were three incidents, and I'll give you my theory on it. But there were three incidents where there was audio. I don't want to say talking cat. I don't believe the cat talked.
No, nor do I.
Right, but there were audio phenomena.
Yes.
There were footsteps. There was the triple knock that you know about.
Sure.
And there were also these vocal sounds, and these vocal sounds were heard when Marcy was not around. So one time, Father Charbonneau was in the basement, and Marcy was upstairs talking to Mom and Dad. And the other two times the phenomenon occurred, Marcy was not around. It was audio phenomena. Now, I'm a ventriloquist, by the way.
Okay.
So one of the methods, really the psychology behind throwing the voice is you can't really throw your voice, but people hear a voice and then they associate it with whatever is the closest to it. For example, if you know the cat's in the basement and you hear a sound, you say the cat's talking. I don't believe the cat's talking, but I do believe there at least appears to be, from multiple witnesses, audio phenomena.
Yes.
So like
definite possibility.
So like the proximity effect almost.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
Ben is a sound expert.
Not an expert. I am just
You're studying to be an expert.
No. Well, sort of. My major is audio production and sound design. So yeah, I know a little bit about it.
Right, and our ears are very bad at directions and all the other things.
Yes, they are. Really bad.
Well, I remember I was in the room when one of the three knocks occurred. That was in that very kitchen where the television was flying around. There was that, and I believe I mentioned Lorraine Warren's burn. Was sitting at the table, and she was, as Ed described it, a deep, I should say, a light trance medium. And I was sitting there watching, and her hand, she went, ooh, and a second-degree burn appeared on her hand right in front of us. There was a policeman witness to that as well. And Ed wanted her out of the house. He was genuinely concerned because he thought, spontaneous human combustion could turn into. We've never done a show on that. Could occur here. So it was. There were things happening all the time. I did not hear any voices or anything. However, I have been in cases where that has occurred, and of course, one is always very familiar with the electronic voice phenomena that is so popular today, and for which there are many, many explanations. But in a place where you've got what we believe are world overlaps going on, anything can happen, and usually does. Let me ask you this: is there an opinion about when the physical phenomena occurred, particularly the refrigerator? Was there an opinion among the people you've interviewed that this was done by, quote, the ghost or the poltergeist, or was simply a byproduct of the energies that were involved? Maybe you didn't get that involved in your...
It's Boyce, God love him, he asked everything.
I'm sure.
And he asked everybody what their opinion was on the phenomena, and some people had no opinion. Didn't change my life at all. Not a big deal. Other people were like, "Oh my God, it's life changing." Some people said poltergeist. Some people said spirit. Other people said they don't know.
Yeah.
Other people said it could be some sort of natural energy or fault line or something. And of course, they researched all that and discounted it. But in lack of knowing what else to say, people had varying opinions. Just to backtrack just for a second, interestingly enough, the burn situation, I have that actually happening on tape.
You do?
Yeah.
Who recorded it?
I don't know.
I didn't know anybody had a recorder going, unless it was the police officer.
Yeah, I don't know. But
well, boy, live and learn, I'll tell you.
Actual burn happening, I have on tape.
No kidding. I'd love to hear that sometime. We have to get together.
Yeah, I'd love.
Well, Bill, before we burn up the hour here, which we've done, this is the quickest hour in a while. Tell us about the book, where you are, and when it'll be coming out, or do you know yet, and what the next steps might be, and your website, etc.
Yes, it is. The book is due out in the fall catalog, so release tentatively September. Could be earlier. I don't know, but I'm figuring September. Which makes sense because, publisher would want to have it out there for Halloween and,
No, of course, yeah. And who's the publisher?
New Page Books.
Oh, New Page Books, good. Yeah, very reputable. Stan Friedman and a lot of friends of ours published with that, yeah.
Yeah, I love Stan. He's one of my idols, but that's a different show.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a lot of similarities, of course, no matter what you're investigating to what Stan says. and I love the belief by proclamation.
Yeah. Well, that's it. But we saw Stan a few weeks ago at the Leominster UFO conference here. But we were interested too in maybe just touching on the subject at the end of the show here about the sort of pan-paranormal perspective, so to speak. It's becoming popular in the UFO community now, not popular, but accepted, to look at the bigger picture that might involve poltergeist activity, UFOs, even cryptids, things of this kind, as perhaps being related in that they might be, there might be the same process behind them, the same process of quantum physics or whatever. So hence my question to you, had you found what we find very often, that this was not the only house affected and that there were other things perhaps going on? And you mentioned in passing, I think, that you had found 2 other homes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, 2 other homes, and I'll be interviewing both those families too.
Okay.
And Ed Warren also backs that up because he had mentioned it in his overview as he's passing the case on to Boyce and Jerry and Keith. 2 other houses that we know of, and there could have been more, but that's what I've heard.
Sure.
I think I think the electromagnetic and the epilepsy commonality that some have theorized is very interesting. Again, centering around energy being a conduit for these things, but I love what you say, Paul, which is, we assume a lot of these things, and our labels are very primitive. If it's good, it's an angel. If it's bad, it's a devil. If it attacks something religious, then it's a demon. And those are very wide reaching assumptions. If an alien visitor comes here, then they brought their president, and he wants to talk to us.
Take me to your leader. Yeah,
our president going on, on these in our space program. So, but it's very interesting, all the different assumptions we have, and of course they all are centered around us being the center.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's right.
Unusual, right?
Oh, sure, exactly. Well, we have our own framework of thinking and our own paradigm, and that isn't necessarily in. I suppose
when you take us out of our own paradigm, that's when things start to get scary.
Yeah,
exactly. One very interesting thing hit me. One of the police officers that said it was a hoax, he said, and this is an amazing quote, he said, "This thing is as phony as a $3 bill will ever be." And I thought that was amazing because, of course, years later, $3 bills came out. And it was a good example of not knowing about something in one time period doesn't mean that, it doesn't exist or not going.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, very true.
Okay, Bill Hall, excellent conversation. We'll be continuing it on future shows, I'm sure, as we go. And I'll be in touch off the air. But thank you so much for a fascinating conversation, and we're just about out of time. We're going to move on to our announcements. And, Bill, it's been great. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing. I didn't touch so much stuff, so I'm glad.
Well, we'll have you back because it's the tip of the iceberg.
Indeed it is.
All right. Thank you.
Okay,
welcome. Have a good
Bill
one.
Hall. All right. Okay, so, Ben, take it away.
Alrighty, so you can visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find over 500 free podcasts of all of our past shows, and you can also check out our site at www.NewEnglandGhosts.com, where there are case studies and photos along with articles by my dad.
And find my books on Barnes & Noble e-reader and Amazon Kindle. That includes Faces at the Window, which is the book in which I write about this case. But if you buy them directly at BehindTheParanormal.com, I'll sign them for you, and you will help us keep those podcasts free. Also on our sites, you'll find direct links to the several charities Ben and I have mentioned, and that are mentioned on the site, USA Cares and Canadian Veterans Advocacy included. On our CBS radio edition of the show on Sunday, December 15th in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Windsor, and Seattle, Vancouver, we will have an open-line show. That may change, but as far as we know, it's going to be an open-line show at this point.
And next Monday, December 16th, right here on WOON 1240 and ONWorldwide.com, we will probably have another open-line show as well, unless something comes
things
up.
are in flux right now with several guests.
Indeed. So we leave you this evening with a quote from Mother Teresa. "We need to find God, and he cannot be found in noise and restlessness. God is the friend of silence." I'm Ben Eno.
And I'm Paul Eno. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey. We'll see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.